There you go. He'll get to where he'll just walk off instead of whirl and run. Notice he's harder to hold going to the right than he is the left. Needs a lot of work this way. And we can just let him out on that rail and work. But the reason to go ahead and try to train him off this lunge line is you may need to work him sometime and don't have the round pin.
We call this tape rider skills, in which we talk about the use of feet, hands, and body position, correct positions for them to be. And we talk about a lot of skills associated with our hands and our feet and our body. There are more than one place to put them, more than one way to use them. We try to talk about all of those, realizing that these are skills that are identifiable, we can practice at, and we can get better. So I think if we'll pay attention to them, they'll be helpful and be useful to us.
It's very difficult when we start talking about horsemanship, using horses, to separate horse from rider, as probably is the case that all horses are a product of their rider. At the same time, there are certain skills that are associated with horsemanship that can be identified, taught, can be practiced, and can be achieved with a certain degree of success for anybody who wants to achieve them. And so for a short time here, we'd like to separate out and identify those skills and not worry a great deal about the horse. We'll find that those skills are relevant. They have a relationship to what we do with the horse, but there's certain skills that a horseman needs to acquire. So I'd like to start and just talk about them for a little. Talk about our feet, talk about our hands, talk about our seat, talk about our body position, and how we ride horses to do different kinds of things with them. And first start, I guess, and talk about the feet. When we start talking about our feet, we look down at our stirrup. We're concerned about that foot. We're concerned about our use of the stirrup. We're concerned about how we've got our foot in the stirrup and how we use it. And the first thing, I guess, to talk about is stirrups in general. And if you pull this stirrup up and look at it, we'll see that across the tread, right through here, this stirrup is about 2.5 inches wide. There are stirrups a great deal wider than that, but if you go much wider than that, much past, say, 3 inches, you get into a stirrup that's rather wide, rather cumbersome, rather boxy, a stirrup that is not really conducive to good kind of what we'd call athletic skills. On the other hand, extremely narrow stirrups on the bottom are useful. They are conducive to you getting your foot well into the stirrup, but for some people, they are a little confining. We call those stirrups oxbow stirrups, or a real narrow. They don't have to be oxbow, but a real narrow tread, which will allow the stirrup to fit right up into the boot. If you look at the boot, there's a place right in here made for the stirrup. And, you know, we talk about getting our foot well up into the stirrup so that we can hold it. A lot of people are concerned that their foot might go through the stirrup. Well, that's why that boot's got a heel on it. That's what it's on there for. We don't need them to walk with. We need them to ride horses with. And it should keep the foot from going through there. And if there's any problem involved with that, we should get a stirrup that is not so long. When you take the length out of it, the foot will not go through. So we get our foot somewhere up into the stirrup well. How far up may be a little bit of an individual preference for other people, but what we really want is to have good control of that stirrup. We're going to move that foot a lot, we're going to use our feet a lot, and we want to have good control of it. So we get it in there, get a hold of it good, and then the next thing, I guess, that concerns people is what to do with the toe angle, where to point it. Should we point it more forward? Should we turn it out? And this is a concern for people. I don't think it's really that important. I think if we drop our feet out of the stirrups, just let them hang natural, and then just pick them up and put them in the stirrups, and let them set at that angle. We'll be comfortable, they'll fit us, and we can use them. While we're talking about that concept, there's some things in there that causes a lot of people trouble. A lot of the people that I work with have problems with it in that they can't get their foot up into the stirrup, and the big cause is that their saddle has not been, what we say, the stirrups have not been set. The saddle has not been trained, where that we, as you look into my saddle now, you'll see that basically the stirrups are open, which means the saddle, the leather, has been wet and trained so that those stirrups stay open. And when I want to put my feet in the stirrups, all I have to do is pick them up and slide them forward. I can find them without having to look at them. I know where they are, and the saddle has been trained there. And when I sit there, the leather is not pulling back against my toe, so that's comfortable. We've got to get our saddle, stirrup set. Get our foot in the stirrup well, because we're going to use it. Now the next thing, we get our foot in there, we want to practice working. We want to use our stirrups. We want to have weight in them. And we want to get our foot in there and have enough weight in them and push on them enough and learn to use them that our heel is lower than our toe, so that we've got a good hold on it, and we've got enough pressure coming down the leg to push the heel down where we really got a hold of the stirrup well. So if we do those things, we're beginning to get our feet right. And I guess to get that pressure in there, then we need to be concerned about the length of stirrup. The length of stirrup, if the stirrup is too long, then I'll have my toe going down trying to reach it. And I don't have good control over it. I cannot use it. So I need to have the stirrup short enough that I've got pressure in it and it pushes my heel down. And there are a lot of ways to determine stirrup length. Let's say this about stirrup length. There is stirrups that are too long, there are stirrups that are too short, and for anybody, there's probably a little room in the middle for a little individual preference. All stirrups don't necessarily have to be exactly the same on every rider. But for anybody, any horseman, we can say they are too long at certain lengths and they're too short at certain lengths, and there's probably some leeway in the middle for us to adjust to our taste, and we'll change stirrup length sometimes for different things that we're doing on a horse. We may ride them a little shorter, not a great deal, but some for some activities than we do for others. Now, the more we think about stirrup length, one good check of it is simply to look at the bend in the knee. And we can tell by the amount of bend that's in our knee whether our stirrups are too long or too short. And as I turn right straight forward, and as you notice, as I shorten stirrup up, I also pull my knees out away from the horse. It's difficult. Pull them open. They open right here. So the stirrups have to be long enough that my leg will drop down and it can fit naturally around the barrel of this horse. And if they're too long, I can't keep my heel right and I can't use them. So that's one way to help us know what length of stirrup we should be riding. Another real good way to think about it is to keep that ankle flexed. Now, don't raise up on the toe. Keep the ankle flexed and simply take a hold of the horn and raise yourself up. If you can raise up out of that saddle to where you can clear it and stand in those stirrups, then you probably have them short enough. If when you raise up, you try to go over the horn, they are probably too short. They raise you extremely high up out of the saddle, then you probably have them too short. So those are kind of keys that's going to help us to fit, help us get our stirrups then the right length. Okay, if we've got our stirrups the right length, we've got our feet in there. Now, we don't have the total skill yet to use them, but we're working at it. We've got them started. We've got them in there in pretty decent shape. We haven't done a great deal yet that's going to cause us to have to change them. So the next thing we need to talk about is we come up. And I guess while we're talking about leg, we need to talk about basically that our feet need to be right straight down underneath us. We need to get away from the rider who will let the foot relax and come behind them. They're not using that stirrup. That same rider tends to lean forward and ride forward on their horse and let their feet drop back. We can't use a stirrup that way. We've lost all of our feet, our aids that we can get out of our stirrup. By the same token, If we get our feet extremely far out in front of us, we get to where we're kind of riding back on this cantle and we're kind of jump behind our horse all the time. So home base, if we want to refer to it as that, should be basically with the leg right straight down underneath us. At no time do we hardly ever want to let the leg get behind us, but we'll find doing a lot of high-speed maneuvers that we will slide them out. We get into what we call a stopping position, which is slide our feet out. That's a cue for the horse. We don't move them much more than that. But so we need some leeway in there where we can move our foot. The other thing, as we come all the way up, got our legs there, is to look at just exactly how we sit down on this horse. We all have a tendency to want to be kind of lazy, roll our pelvis, and sit down just like we're sitting on somebody's sofa. You want to sit down too flat back here, and it tends to push your feet out. What we need to emphasize is roll the pelvis, roll it up a little straighter, get up off of our hip pocket some, and set a little straighter right over our horse with our feet a little more right straight down underneath us. And then if we alter that position and go into this, that's a stopping position. So we're talking about home base, the place that looks kind of sharp and the place that's most useful for most horsemen. So if we get that done, we've talked about our feet, we've talked about our seat. Now let's begin to talk about our hands. There's so much we got to do with our hands, but the first thing, most critical thing for everybody to learn, we've got to be two-handed. We have to train both of our hands to be skillful and to be able to use them. Because right away, we're going to learn that a horse has, on this horse we have a direct rein, which is nothing more than pulling right at the corner of his mouth by one hand, right at the corner of his mouth, and we have a direct rein. We've got to pull him both ways. Horses have to be trained both ways, and if the horse is going to be good both ways, the rider must be very balanced and good in both hands. So that's the first thing we have to develop, is both hands, so that we are as good to the left as we are to the right, and that we can simply pull at the corner of that mouth and get the response that we want. So we get both hands where we can use them. We realize we've got to use both hands, so we try to train both hands. So then I've already introduced to us the direct rein. With our hands, we need to learn what a direct rein is. That's pulling right at the mouth. We need to also learn and how to use our hands on what a bearing rein or a neck rein is, which is the outside rein that I lay on the horse's neck that tells him to turn. We need to learn how to do that. So we've got the direct and the bearing rein. We need to be able to do both with both hands. So we got to work at that a great deal. Now, other things that we need to learn with our hands are how to take both a direct and a bearing rein in one hand. We'll do that a great deal. We'll do that maybe just cross our reins like this. We'll reach down and pick up the reins. Oh, girl. We'll reach down, pick them up, slide it across center, and instinctively, if you saw me drop my hand up on the horn, which is a technique we need to talk about a great deal more, but when I turn this horse and move him around, I have both a direct and a bearing rein on him, both of them, and I have it with one hand. Pull him this way, the inside rein's the shortest, the bearing rein's laying on the neck. We want to practice the other way. We just stop, settle ourselves, reach across, change hands, go across center, put your hand right up here, and practice balancing yourself and being able to pull in both a direct and a bearing rein and going in the other direction. And those are all skills that we'll need to acquire. There's a name for that. It's just what I said it was. It's pulling a direct and a bearing rein both with one hand. We kind of call it a squaw rein. You may refer to it by other terminology, but it's just a technique. A lot of riders will catch right in the middle, and they call that riding with a handful. And by handful means that I have that much leeway within my wrist to be able to tighten up, and as I go to turn the horse, by twisting my wrist, I get a direct rein. So people call that riding with a handful. Now what that is is a middle ground as we learn first to handle a rein in each hand, and the horse learns off the direct rein first. And eventually we are going to show the horse maybe or ride him some with a split rein. And we need to learn how to do that. And what we've got there with the squaw rein and the handful is a middle ground to get the horse up to this stage. That is a middle ground where first he had to have this, then he had to have less of it, and now he needs practically none of it to be able to turn him around. So that's kind of our middle ground, our middle training ground, and it's a skill then. I keep wanting to talk about a skill that we need to identify. We need to practice that. These are things we need to do with our hands. There's other things we'll do with our hands, such as work at the split rein, and let me just talk about the split rein. We can ride this horse a lot of times. A lot of people love to use the roll mal. Roll mal is where you put your hand right around this way, you take the bite and go off over here and drop it down and hold it this way. A lot of the technique, people who use a split rein, that's a one hand. One way to do it. Another is to use the split rein where what is generally accepted in the split rein, we'll get a close-up here, is to have one finger between the reins. There's one finger in there between those reins. Now, one finger in there lets me do this. As I go to turn this horse, if I want to let this rein, the right rein, slip through my hand a little, and we need to learn to go up and down the reins and manipulate them in our fingers, I'll let the right rein slip through my hand and turn the horse with a direct and a bearing. Now, stopping here, you can see that I let it slip through because this rein over here is shorter. I can pick that up with my hand right there. I picked it up, got them back even by just running my hands down the reins, and now I can turn the horse this way and I'll let the other one slide through my hand. Ooh. And you can see that I did that again. That rein over there on the left side is shortest. But you can straighten them back up and get them both back to the same length. All right, that's something about riding the horse with one hand. And we assume we're always going to do it left-handed, but that's not necessarily totally true. We may do it part of the time right-handed, and we need to be good with both hands. Now, the other thing, we go on and talk more about the hands, is talk about how to pick these reins up in one hand. I pick mine up most of the time, with the reins laid over my thumb. Just pick them up that way and coming out through the bottom of my palms. And you may let it come out underneath your little finger, and that gives you a little bit of wrist action here. Or if you like to get a little straighter pull right to his mouth, drop it off. Let it come out above your little finger. And there you have a little straighter pull from your elbow right to his mouth. And that's the part we want to talk about. The elbow should be, our elbow should be dropped down right around our rib cage. This should be the position we're looking for. And then from the elbow to the horse's mouth, we'd like to have a straight line right here. And then we work the horse and using his mouth with some kind of a motion like this where we feel of his mouth. And we, a lot of times, will use the technique of open our hands, which gives the horse a little slack. We'll pick up by just closing our hands and making more contact on his mouth. We can see horses run at very high speed and slide very hard, who are being run like that, and just close your hands. From the horse learning what that pressure is, and for us to learn how to apply it. So if we go around here, the key thing to making this work and good horsemanship is the rein length. If we let our reins out, we wind up with our elbows back behind us like this, or if we take them up too short, we wind up with them up and out away from our body like this. Neither are very desirable. What is desirable is drop our hands straight down and work that rein length to where then we have a straight line right from our elbow right down to the horse's mouth. By doing that then, we learn then to find the horse's mouth. Pick up on his mouth, find where it is, and to be able to feel of his mouth and to develop that feel. that finds the corners of that horse's mouth. Be able to ride it firm enough to get done what you want to do, but to be able to ride it soft enough that the horse can tolerate it, he's happy with it, he feels your soft hands in his mouth, but at the same time you're firm enough to get done what you want done. So we've got, that's a touch, that's a feel. It may look like I have a hold of this mare's head pretty hard, but in a sense I don't, because I'm just right at her mouth, but I'm not pulling a great deal. So that's feel, that's touch, that's something that everybody can acquire if they'll work at it. And you just spend a lot of hours feeling of the horse, feeling of his mouth, and learning to woo. Handle those hands where you can do the things you want to with his mouth. Learn to pull him both ways, learn to turn him around, learn to do a lot of those things with him. So hands are important, I think, and we need to work a lot with our hands. There's just an awful lot to learn to develop good hands, good touch. And I keep talking about light hands, but I must talk about firmness when firmness is required. I think a lot of people let their horses get away with murder, so to speak, and not really perform right because light hands have been, preached to them so much that they're afraid to touch the horse's mouth, afraid to discipline the horse, afraid to train the horse. So if I need harsh or hard contact, I need to put it on there and leave it. When the horse will honor it and relax, I need to recognize it and give the horse's head back. But it's still at the same time there's a certain amount of firmness in there that needs to be reinforced. Now, one of the best real good techniques, let me talk a minute, I skipped over it there a while ago when I said it was instinctive for me to slip my hand up on that saddle horn. There's one thing that a lot of people need to realize about this saddle horn. They think that this saddle horn, a lot of people watched a lot of Western movies, I guess, and that's where they get their ideas. Woo. But if this saddle horn was put on this saddle only to pull a cow with, they could have put it behind us. I'm trying to make a point here that the saddle is here, the horn is here for a lot of purposes, and one of them is to use. And you'll find all excellent horsemen use that horn at one time or another. And I recommend it for people who are trying to get started riding horses. Use it a great deal, because by putting your hand on that horn is going to brace you, going to help you. And I'll show you a drill here in a minute that we use a great deal. I have people tell me when in some of the clinics I do, trying to help their kids, they'll say, make him take his hand off of that horn. Make him quit holding on. And I say, why? Why? The horn is security, makes them feel good. When they get their balance, they have enough security in what they're doing, enough confidence, they'll take it off themselves. So I think that's true. So those of you that are trying to get started riding your horse, learn to use your horn. It's good. Now, one of the techniques that's real good, I think, to get us to using our feet and our hands and get some balance in us is a technique that we use a lot in our schools and recommend it for everybody, and that's to stand up in these stirrups and long trot this horse. And just cross your reins like that on the horse's neck, reach down, pick them up off center, so you've got both a direct and a bearing. Now reach and get your horn and raise up. Again, that's going to check your stirrups. See if they're the right length. Raise up and let this horse go to trotting. And as the horse trots, you're going to get weight in those stirrups. You're going to get balanced. You're going to practice. It's going to be a practice for you. And you've got a light hand on the contact on the horse's mouth, putting his head, putting the horse right where you want him. By pushing him right where you want him, you're using both hands now and both feet. It's going to develop good feet, develops balance, develops coordination. Woo. Now what we do one way, everything we've got to do the other way. When I talk about coordination, I like to talk about the football coach that said he thought he was looking forward to a good team in the fall, thought he had some boys that could play, and he said, what do you mean, Said, well, I think we've got some guys with coordination. Questioned a little further, said, what do you mean coordination? He said, well, I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. That's what we're doing here. We're doing a lot of things at once. That's coordination, trying to make it all put together. Now, we turn around and go the other way, stop, change. Get the hand over here. Learn to use this hand on the horn. And again, stand up in the stirrups and trot the horse out. You see me post a little bit. If you were in a hunt seat saddle, this is a posting trot. And it's supposed to be posted. And I can post in this saddle. But what I'd like to encourage people to do is stand. I want you to use your feet. I want you to learn to get weight in your stirrups. And to keep your foot from dangling. Don't just sit down and let your foot dangle. So this is just a practice. It's just a technique that will help get that done. Where we learn to just stand up in long trot and use our feet and hands. Good technique. We'll find out a little later as we get further into horse training that this is very much a training gait also for this horse. If you don't think your stirrup length is important, this is supposed to be a posting trot, and if you can't stand in those stirrups correctly, if you take this gait right here and try to sit it, it is terrible. It's not made to sit. It's made to either post or to stand in your stirrups and ride. Ooh. And the further we go in the horse business, you're going to find that's a training gait, that's a suppling gait. Your horse needs to learn it as well. It's a good skill for the rider, but the horse needs it. Everything we're going to teach a horse at a lope, we're first going to teach him at that trot. We teach him to walk at a trot, and then before we move into higher speeds, we're going to teach him at that. Plus, it's a nice suppling gait to warm a horse up with. Some people have a reluctance to use it because they've worked to try to get what we call this nice soft jog trot on their horse. And they feel like that if they do that, if they let him extend, that he won't have this trot. And that's just not true. Because there's no reason why a horse can't have both and shouldn't have both. And one of them is not contradictory to the other. Any time that they're so much different, they're apart, the gait's not the same, the rider and the body position's not the same, I'm telling the horse something different both times. They should not be confused. Should not confuse the horse. When I stand on this horse, it should mean for him to extend. That's his cue, to reach. And when I sit down, ease him back, that should be his cue to relax into the nice soft jog trot. Ooh. So I think if people will do that, they'll find they'll supple their horse. Plus, I really want to talk about it here as a chance to improve our rider skills. And it will do that just for us. Let me lope the horse a little and apply these same skills now to loping. Let me spread my hands out. For some of you that may have a little trouble with the hands spread, with the reins separated, there's nothing wrong with crossing the reins and reaching down and picking them up this way, where you can learn to use them this way. This kind of a technique is good for people to get started. I think is fine. Eventually, as you get into higher speed things, what will be the objection is this slack hanging on the horn, getting in your way, and your inability to take up on those reins and adjust them while you're in action. But to try to get started, if people would like to do that, drop the reins, cross them, reach down, pick them both up, adjust them to where your elbows fit, get them on your fingers and balance them, and you can do the same thing. But the further you go, you're probably going to want to develop a technique where there's a rein on each side. And we need to learn, when I'm talking about pulling this direct rein, I guess this is a good place to talk about it, is that at times we'll do what we call an open rein. To get this horse trained, I need to know how to open my hand, spread it out over here to pull this horse around. And to get my horse started, a lot of times we will do that. But eventually, we spread it, we can get our horse to turn it. But eventually, sooner or later, we want to close that hand as quickly as possible and pull right towards our pocket. That's what we want to develop, that skill, because that's going to be closer to when we ride him with one hand. So we want to develop and learn to pull right straight towards our pocket. We may open it at times to get the horse started, okay? Now let me lope a little bit. Get the reins the same way, hands the same way, and try to get the same balance. Squeeze the horse up, try to pay attention to where her feet are, try to get her hands the right way. Learn to sit right straight in the middle of this horse. Teach this horse to respond off of your cues of your hands and your legs. Don't get into a lot of body sway and a lot of body pushing. Not only will not help the horse, in a lot of cases it'll hinder him. So learn to sit right straight up. We talk about this from a horse's standpoint of teaching this horse to look right straight through the bridle. And we'll go back to that several more times, but I can't teach him to look through the bridle if I can't look through it. That means his head straight away, the horse in perfect balance and in a line, and us with our hands like we want them. Woo. Everything we teach him one way, we need to teach him the other direction. And we need to practice. It's not exactly the same feel to us going both ways. The horse doesn't lope exactly the same going both ways. So we need to practice, practice, practice. We got these hands right where we want them, and we can go along with this horse. Get this horse, I'm right in his mouth, and if I want to give him a little contact, a little slack, I can do that. I can let him down, let him lope on a loose rein. I can pick him back up, get a little contact back into his mouth. Woo. Now, every time I've stopped the horse, I have said whoa, and I've gone into the stopping position. And we'll get into that later, but pick that up as a technique. Woo. Where I've gone into the stopping position so that this horse can learn these, and that's a skill of the rider. So we've got to develop that as a skill ourselves. Woo. Where we can stop this horse by some method other than banging on his mouth. So we'll use the mouth as a discipline, woo, to reinforce a lot of the other things. Okay? Now let me talk about a little bit why the two hands and learning to do that is so good for us. So good for us because we can talk a little bit more now about horsemanship. There is such a thing as really functional horsemanship and such a thing as really looking pretty on a horse. I really don't know what pretty is, but I see it in people and I recognize it and I appreciate it. I don't know what it's really worth. I don't know that it's going to really make you that much better horseman. Some of the best horsemen I know of don't look particularly what I call real pretty on a horse, but they're very functional, they're very good, they know what they're doing, and they do it very correctly. So there's a little difference here, but I think to try to make us look a little sharper, if that's important to us, the two hands will help us. It will square us up here. We have people who sometimes think it's punchy, that only ride with one hand. I think they get real sloppy. They ride with one hand. They wind up with the hand they're riding with, that shoulder leading above the other one. They get crooked across here, and they go to leaning towards their horse with their hand. They drop a shoulder. They get crooked across the top up here, and all you've got to do is take a rein in each hand to stop that. That same person that's crooked across the top will soon get crooked down at the bottom. You twist up here and you'll find yourself moving your feet and riding your horse at an angle, dropping this elbow way back out of position. None of those are good, and riding a horse with two hands will help us get up in the middle of him. A couple of other things that happen a great deal, I think, when riding a horse with one hand all the time. Not that we don't want to develop that skill, we do. But not only is it this, where we think that's punchy, and somehow or another it gets to be in, and it's not good horsemanship, and a real good horseman don't do it. But the other things we get doing is the loose elbow. We get to helping this horse a great deal more than we need to, which all of this is kind of ridiculous, and we get to helping him this way. We just think he won't go if I don't pump on him and do some of these things. I'm exaggerating them, make them look rather ridiculous. I should sit on my horse as still as I can, with my hands as correct as I can, my feet as correct as I can, while still being firm and positive and riding my horse. Because I hate to see people sit up here still. They look like they're going to break, and they let their horse get away with all kinds of errors because they don't ride him, they're not positive with him. At the same time, they don't know that they can do that and be relaxed, and you can do that. The horse can live with truth. He can live with honesty. He can live with consistency. Same thing, you do it all over, one time right after another the same way continually. So if we do those, try to get our hands right, get our body right, get them where we can use our hands, use our feet, and I do believe for most horsemen who are beginning that if you wait until you get all of these skills perfected, you know, before you really ask your horse to do a great deal, you're defeating the purpose. Your skills can improve while you've got something to do with your horse, while you're doing something with him. I put people who are pretty green, just starting to ride a horse, pretty quick. We go to stopping, we go to turning around, we go to rolling back on the fence. They don't do it real good, but the thing it does for them is give them a reason and a purpose for a lot of this and helps you get started, so don't be afraid to do something with your horse. And while you're doing it, your skills will improve. You waited till you thought you had all your skills just like you want before you really started, you know, you might not ever get there. So it's not that important. So I think these are the things that are kind of critical to us as far as being able to ride a horse effective. These are some things we can identify. These are things we can work with, and some skills we'll need as we become more challenged with our horse and want to do some additional things with it.
As I look back over now the rider skills tape, I think we've identified some skills pretty specifically that we can work at. As I look back at the tape, I think about the one shot that zeroed in on my foot in the stirrup. And to me, from the angle we had with the camera and from that shot, it appears to me that my toe is pointed out a great deal more than I think it is when I ride. So look at some of the shots when we're going and try to look at that natural position of your foot. Try to keep in mind probably what's ideal. Yes, there are some wrong and right, but also get into something that's comfortable and kind of fits you. The other place in the film, a second place, is when we were showing letting reins slide through our fingers from side to side. I'm not sure that our camera always followed, but I think you can visualize that very easily, that if you're pulling your hand this way and you let that rein slide through your hand, when you stop, it's going to be the longest, and so forth, vice versa. So I think you can visualize that and make that work all right for you. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning, and in addition to what we said in the film, is that I have the privilege of helping a lot of people get started to riding horses. We get their feet right, we get their hands right, and we go to working at it. And we spend a great deal of time at that long trot because that makes you put some weight in your stirrups. That's the worst thing that a novice rider just getting started to do. They want to sit down and they don't understand using their feet. They're not comfortable. Well, when you have to stand up in your stirrups, it makes you aware of your stirrups and you start using your feet. So spend a great deal of time at that. And then people tell me, look, you got my feet right, my hands right, you got me right. My body don't fit this horse. You know, I can't sit here like you do. My body doesn't fit, and all of these kinds of things. Nobody can take the bounce out of that sit. You've got to take it out yourself, and it comes out with just some hours of staying there, riding this horse, getting comfortable with him, and as we say, let a little sweat run off both you and the horse, and you will go to molding together, and it'll fit, and you'll feel comfortable, and you'll enjoy what you're doing.
Like a lot of them. There you go. He'll get to where he'll just walk off instead of whirl and run.